From advertising, branding, to design and experiences, how are we going to use AI to create the future that we want? Join us for breakfast. 84% of developers use AI every day, but less than 30% actually trust the outcome. What does it mean to be a developer today in the age of AI? So in this episode, it's a pretty technical one. We're going to be talking to two very senior developers who've built enormous platforms on Google, but also for other private businesses. And we're going to find out, what does AI mean today? What does it mean for software from the people who are actually on the front line of the applications of AI? So welcome to a new episode for breakfast. This is an episode I think that's been a long time coming, because we're talking to two of my colleagues who are effectively on the front line of AI. They are the chief engineers, the product developers who actually work with the rawest, often most cutting edge aspects of AI and deploy them and implement them in technologies, at businesses. And I think what's going to be really interesting about this episode is we're going to get an engineer's perspective. So it's not the tabloid headlines, it's not all the messaging we've heard around how it's going to change the work-life balance in our careers, etc. This is really an engineer's perspective. What's the value? How does it work? What are the pitfalls? What are the trade-offs? And so I've got two people. Beside me, I've got Eric. Eric is the CTO of Left Field Labs. He's also been acting as CTO for a number of our clients, helping them deploy products. And then on the call, we've got Ian Lollar. Ian Lollar also is chief engineer, but he's working across Google products, and he works on some of their platforms, which are events platforms. So hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of people use these platforms daily, built on Stack. And both of them have a pretty different perspective and application of AI. So I guess the first question I have is, can you give me a little sense of how much you use AI when you get up first thing in the morning? How much of a part of your day-to-day is AI for you, Ian?
I don't get out of bed unless Gemini says it's okay for me to. No, I use it on and off throughout the day for some personal uses and professional uses. So like personally, for a while there, I was actually using LLM to help, kind of track dietary things, keep me on schedule for certain like protein goals, things like that. And then professionally, I find it useful for sort of rapid way of researching multiple methodologies and, compare between them. And I've also definitely used it to help accelerate certain coding tasks, especially in projects that I'm not super familiar with, but I'm coming in to try to do some rapid adjustments to.
But I mean, you make it sound like it's just, you use some of it in some specific instances, but are you basically saying it's not part of your life day in, day out? It's not you not constantly have a tool at some point throughout the day?
You mean like running like an agent loop or something?
Yeah,
like that?
An agent loop, or you get it to prompt something, or you might have an assistant here, or you might have agents working in the background completing a task while you're focusing on something else.
A lot of agents running in the background is not really my style at the moment, but I have certainly kept a finger on the pulse of that particular movement. I'd say that it supplements a lot of the tasks that I do throughout the day, but is the only thing that my browser or tool sets opened on is just, LLMs? No, I largely approach it as a complementary tool to the variety of things I need to do, whether that's something coding-based, research-based, or, I'm sure most people can relate to, I don't really want to write this particular document, but, I gotta, because it's a demand in my job. And so this helps me kind of bootstrap that or get me off of the blank page and closer to something where I can send it out.
Okay, so I think we've got one. I'm glad you said it this way, because I think one of the perspectives is that AI is fit for purpose in certain things, and it's more of a cautious adoption to it. and I'm not going to put you on the other side, Eric, but the conversations we've had, Eric, like you've used Claude bot deployments, you've done a lot of testing, and how much would you say today AI is a part of your life day to day?
I would say I'm on the other end of the spectrum.
Okay.
It's at the point now where like if we're at a dinner party and someone's like, well, how do you use your AI day to day? I'm like, well, and my wife is just like, I'm done, out. But yeah, no, I use it frequently for both personal and work things. One of the things that has been most useful for like the OpenClaw instance that I have is I have a couple kids, and like the number of emails I get from school on a day-to-day basis is just like a deluge. And I have a process that just runs and will give me a daily summary of what I need to know for school that day, what's coming up. And so that is the thing I get in the morning. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of different tools that I use throughout the day. There's a lot of just helping me keep track of what happens in meetings, collating, making sure that I'm following through on things. Like I have tried to offload part of that, like I guess the mental tracking of things that I used to have to do myself in the past, and I found I'd be very effective for that.
Oh yeah, I would say I'm the same. If there's something that I really hate doing, like my timesheets, I'll definitely find a way to get it done. And I found actually for that, agentic tools that work in the background are massive help, but they're not perfect and they require human to do. We'll touch on that. So from a professional standpoint, so now the work you do with your clients, I was just reading how last year developers across Stack Overflow who were interviewed, and we're talking 49,000 developers in the US, 84% of them claim that they use AI daily and exhaustively across everything that they do professionally. It's up from 76% the year before. So it's a hockey stick in the developer community still in adoption. And I'm curious, you both work on very different projects. The permissions and what tools you can use are different.
Yeah.
Could you tell a little bit like how you use it professionally? And maybe I'll start with you, Ian, because I think it's probably the easiest one to start with.
By and large, my tenure at Left Field Labs has been very Google focused. Lately, it's been more diversified. Google, it should come as no surprise, has proprietary almost everything. To use tools, you have to use their tools internally. Some of those tools are reflections of tools that they provide externally. Some of them are not. And whether it is available externally or internally, it always has a head-scratching name internally. I know that there's been an increase of usage and adoption of those tools, including tools that are, what's the phrase du jour, agentic engineering focused. But for some other coding on some other projects, I've used some Claude. I've used some other like Chinese models for stuff like Kimi K2 or DeepSeek. And I've used it with some different types of tool sets. For instance, OpenCode is an open source agentic TUI. You know, I've seen some success with using that, especially to dive into code bases that are large and foreign to me, and I want to pick up and move faster on some things. So maybe a good example of this is recently I was pulled into a project, and it was not a small code base. To expedite how I could make a positive impact, I spun up a workflow to basically say, you know, try to suck as much of this code base into your context and start walking me through how it's structured and how things work. And then started narrowing in from there on the things that I thought were probably the most likely to be suspected as having issues, right? So let's sniff out how the database stuff is working in this code base, and then eventually narrow it in on what happened to be a series of pull requests that I opened up against the repo that actually wound up anywhere from like 1.5 to 5 times performance increase on things. And so I don't think I could have gotten to those contributions nearly as fast as I could have without using, you know, these processes to help sift through the code base.
But I'm guessing particularly for Google work, there's a lot of restrictions or how you use it.
So I wouldn't say that, like, there are restrictions in terms of you have to use our tools. You can't use any external tools. None of our code can ever leave our extremely large sandbox. They've spent literally decades making their own frameworks and their own infrastructure and their own ways of doing things. And so the challenges that you face building stuff inside of Google is different than the challenges you face building stuff outside Google. Both have challenges, to be clear, but they're different types of challenges. And so For instance, I know that at first some of the AI assisted coding was made more difficult inside of Google because AI has to be trained. And because these are proprietary mechanisms, there's a lot less public data out there about how they work. Google had to, undergo processes to say, hey, we need to feed and train our own internal models to make developers more effective in writing that code. The one caveat I was going to mention with that unnamed project that I did that workflow with, that's not to say that AI the entire time was holding my hand and being like, let me guide you through all of this and show you exactly what should be done and how things should go. There were certainly plenty of times that I had to pull it back because it was like, you should just do this. And I had to use my own squishy human brain to say, no, I think if you do that, then this would happen. And then the AI does the classic AI mea culpa. You're like, oh my goodness, you are so right. You are so smart. Oh my gosh, we shouldn't do that at all. So it's a give and take, right? Like it helped me bootstrap myself into where do things live, how do things function. But a lot of the theoreticals of what should we do and how should we change things, I would say I was at least partially in the driver's seat on that because I caught many suggestions that it was making that I was like, that's going to actually make things worse. Or like you're sacrificing security for performance. That's a bad idea. So, what you're supposed to keep your hands on the wheel when you turn on autopilot in the car, right? Like you've got to keep your hands on the wheel.
Well, so another Stack Overflow survey, a bit shocking, but 2.6% of developers highly trust AI, only 2.6, and 20% highly distrust. So it's interesting that the people who use it the most, who understand it the best, are very few and far between those who would hand over a lot of their day-to-day to it. And I'm curious, so on your side, Eric, because you work outside of Google, what's your relationship with AI and how much do you hand over and develop with it?
I think that like those numbers don't surprise me because if you use AI enough on complex enough problems, you see where if you do not guide it properly or give it the right type of instructions, it falls short, predictably. Right. Mm-hmm. To me, that's just like a constraint of the tool, right? There are a lot of other tools that you could similarly very easily go off the rails with if you do not apply your knowledge and this is actually how it needs to work, and use it as a tool, not as something that can act on its own and get you reliably to an endpoint. So I trust it to behave in the way that I like in that pattern, which enables you to really use it very effectively, right? If you don't assume that it's just going to be able to solve every problem for you, then you know exactly how to engage with it.
Look out for.
Exactly, what to look out for, and it becomes much more effective as a result.
When we talk sometimes and you talk about the different aspects of development, you'll talk about an API call, you'll talk about a database, you'll talk about a CMS, all these technical aspects that go into architecting a solution. How do you see AI? Is AI just another one of those? Has it got a special relationship that's different to these tools? How do you define what AI is as an engineer, as an architect of big platforms?
At the base level, it is still just a system where you provide input and you get output. And so you can think of it as a step in a process or a step in a workflow, with the added complication that the results are not deterministic. So you might get something different every time you provide the same or similar input. So you can think of it in that way. You can also think of it as something that is more multi-purpose. When we're designing systems, you tend to think of components as like there's a standard sort of interface for it. You know what goes in and you know what goes out.
Yeah.
With AI, you can think more along the terms of like there is a broad type of input and it has tools that it's able to use in order to interact with internal systems. Yeah. And so you can think of it more as something that is able to like interact more richly with the system. Mm-hmm. And there are benefits and trade-offs with that approach too.
Yeah. When I hear you talk about it, Ian, you're kind of treating it not exactly as you would a tool. A tool has a reliable relationship. You can set something, it comes back to you something else. You talk about it more in the sense of something that is to have a lot of oversight over. You'll send it certain tasks, but it's not an exactly one-for-one relationship as you would with any other tool in your toolkit.
I think one of the interesting things we're seeing across the industry is a direct correlation with people's threshold for risk. Yeah, I mean, like using LLMs to accomplish these tasks, I would say a very high percentage of the time, they work fine. Great. So yeah, did what I asked. And then a low percentage of the time, they erase your production database. My tolerance for that risk is very low. I say if that risk exists, I don't like the existence of that risk, and so I want to constrain it more.
There's middle ground there too, where you ask it to do something and it does the thing, it just doesn't do a very good job, or it's not scalable. It has not like actually considered the broader context of the problem. And so like that is like, those are kind of like the issues that are not as immediate, but like can linger for a long time. And that's a real concern too.
Now you're adding in another variable. What is the size of the thing that's been asked to do? How complex is it? How long is it going to take? The underpinnings of an LLM is an unfathomable amount of data input into it. All the words around other words are sort of weighted together into here's the statistical probability that one should come after the other. And then when you prompt it, that's the process it does to actually output a response. If it chooses an interesting statistical next word to use that could send it on a branch down the next word and the next word and the next word, this is how things like hallucinations or other oddities occur. Now, there's then been ways to try to push back on that through like agentic loops, because the agentic loop can then go like, I output this, let me review it. No, that was off the handle, so maybe I should do that again. And so it tries to self-correct itself now. But there are those inherent possibilities for flaws that occur. That also means that by nature, it's usually not giving you the worst version of anything it's been trained on, but it's also not giving you the best version of what it's been trained on. It's giving you the most common version of things that it's been trained on. It's really good to give it common tasks since it's giving you the most common outputs, right? But pick and choose wisely. What tasks deserve to have the machine that gives common outputs applied to it versus what tasks deserve to have your output applied to it. Not all tasks are weighted the same. Not all tasks need the same sort of attention and specialty, skill, expertise, what have you.
Yeah, something I still struggle to get my head around. So when you're a software engineer, or at least like pre-AI, you would build a database, build a piece of code, and you could expect the application to run for a period of time until one of the partners in the loop, it could be the person serving your application, it could be, I don't know, a database or an API call that you make to get some information from someone. Someone in the loop might change, and then you'd have to go up and create an update on the software. But for long stretches, the application would just run. You'd have to sometimes pay a hosting cost and things like that, but it would run. With AI, when you build an application on top of it, you're adding a variable that I haven't seen before. It's a variability of outcome. It's not predictable. Like a piece of software, even an advanced piece of JavaScript or Python, there's a predictability of that. Every time you press play, it'll do it over and over, unless there's a bug, and then you can find that. But there's a predictability. AI loses that predictability. And so how do you build an application, like a giant application, like maybe one that you build at Google for other clients, on a piece of technology that has an amount of variability of outcome in the mix?
You're right that there is variability, but when you are working with, like, one thing that's important to consider here is a lot of people are just working with the latest ChatGPT, the latest Claude, whatever it is, right? As an engineer, there are actually a lot of ways to interact with models. So you can pin a model. You can, rather than just saying like, give me the latest response from the latest whatever you have, you can say, this is the model that we are going to be using, and you will only get responses from that model. And variability within that model is predictable. How we manage that is that when you are developing a process, whatever it might be, you build out these sets of evals, which is basically, here is the input I'm giving and the answer that I expect. And if you build that out, you will have an understanding of what percentage of the time is this particular model giving me the answer that I need. And
How do we evaluate it? Is it one model evaluating another?
Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes it's, I mean, like a lot of different ways to get input and output, right? So sometimes it'll be you're ending up with like something that's code, like a JSON object, and you're actually looking at the values. Sometimes you're looking for like semantic similarities between how friendly is this response, how helpful is the response, as opposed to the reference one. There are a lot of different ways to measure those evals, and a lot of times you're measuring across like a few different metrics. The foundation of any good AI development process is having a strong set of evals that you can use to really understand your quality. And if a model changes or something new comes out, gives you the ability to test out that new model against a concrete set of data of expectations to know if I make a switch to the newer model, is it really going to give me a better outcome than where I'm at?
It sounds a little bit like what you do when you build an organization with people. There might be some variation, but at least it's within a benchmark that's acceptable.
I was going to compare it to the sort of unreliability that we're talking about is actually no different than distributed systems as well.
What do you call a distributed?
Distributed systems, meaning that you don't just have one server doing everything. Like maybe one server doing this particular task and then kicking off a different task to a group of servers to handle a variety of things that then may update stuff concurrently, and then something's waiting until they're all done with their concurrent work, which may all arrive at different times to then do the next thing and the next thing and next thing. And even though each of those pieces may be more deterministic in the way that you described, Ian, where you were saying push a button, it should be doing the same thing. Once you put a lot of those pieces together into a distributed system, something may fail and the next piece in the line doesn't get the response that it expects, and then things can break down. And so you have to build ways of detecting like, ooh, I did not expect that response, or this thing is just hanging and not doing anything at all. And so I think there's similarities with that when you're building against an LLM, because you cannot always depend upon the response. It may give the right response 99 out of 100 times, but the 100th time it may just go a little cuckoo. As with all tools, all opportunities, all technology, there are pros and cons to anything that you're using. You know, you use a database for a specific reason, and LLMs, you know, like they have capabilities that other things don't have, but they have disadvantages as well. You know, your originating question was, how do you build something for someone or for yourself that incorporates this technology in it in a reliable way? I'd say my first response to that is there's so much misunderstanding about what this technology is capable of. Some people are using it for the wrong things anyway. They're like designing out what they want their system to be, and they're using it in place of things that have already existed for a long time that are going to be better suited. You know, I think it's better to look at the pieces in your application flow and say, where do we need these special, unique capabilities of what an LLM brings to the table in terms of we actually want non-deterministic capabilities. Conversation is non-deterministic. If we want conversation that feels fluid, that's where this is really beneficial. But it's not necessarily beneficial that it is guaranteed to always give me the same semantically correct JSON output every single time.
So let's transition really well to the next part of this, because if I summarize it a little bit, so you work a lot on Google, you work on internal tools, which we can't discuss, but they're designed, they're fit for purpose. So you take a very measured approach. Is this the right fit for purpose? If the answer is yes, lean in cautiously. If it's not, keep doing what you've been doing. And then Eric, I think from what I hear from you, it's a bit more exploratory. You have access to more tools, you're building, so it's fit for purpose for the client, but at the same time, you use it for plenty of other things, including in your personal life and your calendar. And so you've prepared.
We're also talking about two separate things too, right? Like, are you using this to like inside of the thing you're building, / are you using this to help you build a thing? Those are two different landscapes.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And so, but that's great, because you've both got two slightly different demos to present to us. So the way I've been talking about it is, one is, or actually Eric coined it, one is sort of the Swiss Army knife. So it's using AI to do many things and to see how well it does it. Whereas your approach, Ian, is a bit more scalpel and precise, zeroing in on what it does really well and just focusing on those few things here. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yours?
Sure. So my job is fun in that I do get to try out a lot of different technology. Like part of what what we try to offer is a good broad understanding of what's available out in the market, so that when people come to ask us how to build a particular thing, we're already pretty informed about like what's possible and what's a good application for it. I spend a lot of time thinking about this idea of like what is something that's appropriate for the Swiss Army knife, something like Claude Code or just like ChatGPT for solving a lot of these problems, versus the very specific like workflow. Like it's something that needs to behave in a very specific way to serve a particular purpose.
Right.
Like one of the things that I always enjoy is like a new model comes out, and we talked about this idea that like if you don't steer a model in the right way, like your results will predictably be kind of not necessarily what you want them to be. So I've been working on a project internally, which is a little bit of a knowledge sharing platform. It's basically like YouTube internally, and we'll post videos of people's demos with different AI tools to be able to just share the knowledge more broadly. One of the things I want to have is a view counter, so we know how much people are using the tool, how much people are watching various videos. Ian, I think that you, having built video platforms before, know the challenges of the view counter, right? There are a lot of ways to do that, and there are a lot of bad ways to do that.
Like what counts as a view, and then also if you're doing that at scale, you start also running into technology issues of how can you accumulate these counts in a way that's not going to blow up your data storage and things of that.
Right. A lot of people who are trying to increment that view counter at the same time, and so it locks the database or it hits an API limit or something like that. So just being at this point in the project, I pointed Claude at 2 copies of the same code base. In this first instance, what I did was add video view counters so that I know how many people have watched these videos. A view should only count after someone has watched it for over 30 seconds. As a prompt, this is something that like anyone who is vibe coding on a project, like this is a pretty reasonable thing to say. And I let this run. It thought it was a good, I think like 6 or 7 minutes, and did its own review of the code. And what it came back with was largely what I expected, which is that it was a naive prompt. And with that naive prompt, it also gave me a naive output. So exactly those gotchas we were talking about. It has a function in there that will the code base is using Firebase, which is like great technology for some things, but if you just try to do an increment counter on a Firestore database, like you're going to have problems. It's going to have that lock issue. It is just like known that that's not what that particular technology is for.
Firebase is a real-time database, so it can live add count. But you could have used it should have recommended a conventional database. Is that
even within Firestore? There are alternate ways to do this that are like recommended, documented, and recommended.
You might want to shard out your rights or things of
exactly,
because it's not just a memory. There's also a subscription to Firebase. Is that?
No, it's just a part of their underlying technology. Like it's how databases have to be designed in a way that provides reliability, but also distribution. And so it has to favor things like reads over writes, and it all depends on the folks that design that database on where they need to place limitations to then guarantee other outputs. And so there are trade-offs.
So why did it get it wrong? So basically, just in layman's terms, it picked the wrong fundamental technologies. It made the wrong recommendation, which is something. It
was actually a couple of things.
A couple of things.
It did not decide. It didn't approach the problem in a way that considered scalability to be a design constraint.
Okay.
There's also a security issue underlying it, which was that any authenticated user could go in. It did implement the wait 30 seconds before you increment their view.
Yeah.
But the way that it created the endpoint to record that, it was fit for purpose, right? Record it when someone sends me an increment view message, but any user who's logged into the system can send that. So that is an implementation that could easily be hacked, scammed, right? So if this were not for an internal tool, that'd be a really big deal.
But the issue here is that that would have been a table stakes issue for any developer. A developer would have gone security plus technical limitation would have been the basics of what would have informed a choice, and there it failed to do that.
I also did this, in this implementation, I wrote a slightly longer prompt, but more details, right? So we need to add video view counters so that we know how many times the videos have been viewed. some requirements. A view should only count after someone has watched it for 30 seconds. Views need to be logged and auditable in case of attempted fraud. Recording views can't be a performance hit. No database lockups if people are hitting it at the same time. It needs to work at scale. If needed, you can introduce additional infrastructure to the solution to effectively implement this feature. You can use the locally running Docker service to spin up new components if needed. A lot more detail.
Are you specific there about your expectation?
And as expected, this one ran for quite a bit longer. But in doing so, it was able to pick apart this problem in a much different way. Mm-hmm. I expected it to actually spin up some additional technology that would, basically have like a task queue to be able to record the instances of where people had triggered the view counter, and then probably like a Redis database or a different type of database to record and be able to report on those. Mm-hmm. Just different technology that seems a bit more suited for purpose. It wound up doing exactly what Ian mentioned, which is it actually, within the Firestore database, it made shards, different database iterations, so that whenever a view count gets recorded, it hits one of 20 random shards, that'll be updated. So your odds of a lockup are dramatically reduced. And then there's a process that happens in the background to automatically tally those up so that people will maybe not immediately, not to that like exact second get the view count, right, but like good enough.
This wasn't pre-planned either. I had no idea that happened.
Yep. So the other thing that was really cool here.
Did it count down?
So because I had given the instruction that like, hey, you can use a little bit different infrastructure to use this. Yeah. The first version basically just implemented the code as requested and did a very basic job. In this version, it actually spun up an internal server. It created its own test video, and then
where?
On my computer. I gave it access to like virtual machine within my computer so that it could basically do whatever it needed. It could add different runtime environments and do some additional things. Uh-huh. So you can see what it's doing here. It actually created this test video using a program called FFmpeg, and it is waiting for this to run for 30 seconds to check on the page that a view has been recorded. And it's going to run through actually the different scenarios where if someone rewinds and then plays back, it's not going to record it twice. But if they refresh the page, it is going to count that as 2 views, because like kind of following YouTube rules, right? Yeah. If you come back to the same video a few times, why not count that a few times? So
they went over 30 seconds. Did it log a view?
You can see the view is logged right here. Yep. And so this ended up being a small change to the prompt, but the right language, the right way of framing this problem had a tremendous impact on the implementation. Right. And so this is really like, especially as like we're evaluating new models, we get a lot of questions about like, is it well suited for these types of purposes? As much as I've been really impressed with some of the capabilities of Fable 5, there is still so much that relies on the operator to get things done the way that you would want them to be executed.
Right. So being able to set the problem is still, whether you're writing a piece of text or you're looking for a recipe or you're coding the next YouTube, understanding what makes it a success is like
exactly
critical. And the more depth you have in your knowledge, the better the outcome will be.
It's like if you give someone the keys to like a Formula One car, like there's a big difference between like, I'll say me driving it, because I know you've got some rally racing experience, but there's a big difference between someone who's just like, okay, I'll try this thing out, and someone who really understands the machine and the ways in which it is supposed to operate.
Right.
What happens if the video is less than 30 seconds?
Okay, actually very interesting. The first one, it has an accordance for that, where if this is my naive prompt, it decided that if a video is less than 30 seconds, it would count the view if it is played through over 90%.
Okay.
The more structured prompt did not have a solution. So a video under 30 seconds would just have gone unnoticed.
Just a failure of a video.
Sadly.
Fortunately, here on Breakfast, the videos are way longer than 30 seconds.
Yes, especially this one.
And everybody watches, way more than 11 seconds. So, Ian, yours is a different approach, right? Yours is more narrow.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually an open source repo that I'm working on. It's still in a rough state, so demo gods, be kind to me. But what I actually started with is arrogantly a protocol specification that I created called the Language Model Protocol, which is sort of a play on something called the Language Server Protocol, which is a developer thing that Microsoft made quite a while ago, LSP. I like the idea of, can I make a protocol for how an implementation of this system would work, and then people could make their own implementations or their own clients against it. So what does that mean? What it means is it handles communication with different providers, whether remote or locally, for different LLMs, and a bunch of the communication required to deal with, like, I've asked to do some sort of thing, a task, a question, what have you, and then it's feeding that off to the LLMs and getting responses back and dealing with all the intricacies of how that may work. But it's decoupling it, because what I wanted to be able to do is make a bunch of what are called clients to be able to interact with the same centralized server on this. And why is that beneficial for me? Well, I like to use NeoVim as my editor of choice. And so I want to be able to interact with it there. So I want the ability to take this with me where I want to go and carry all of what I've done with it along with me wherever I want to go. So part of this implementation is that there's a local database that is storing the messages that I'm sending and the messages that are coming back from the LLMs into the database. And so no matter what LLM I'm targeting, what provider, I'm actually keeping the data with myself. And I could even switch those providers like mid-conversation if I wanted to. I could start a conversation with ChatGPT and I could move that conversation over to Gemini. This is totally possible because I'm keeping the context locally rather than depending on a third-party, walled garden to store and keep everything. And so as an example of this, when I open up NeoVim here, you can see that it's connected to that daemon that I've created, daemon status.
Can you tell us just briefly, what is NeoVim?
Think like, I'm sure you hear like a lot of developers use VS Code or Cursor or things like that. They're all text editors. They're just environments to be able to write code in. I like writing code in NeoVim. So I want to adopt these tools into an environment that I like rather than me having to move to a different environment that I maybe don't care for just to get access to these tools. And so the way that I've designed this is around some centralized functions that I sort of categorized out. Hey, how do I want to interact with LLMs and generate things? So first off, I really like just having conversations with them so I can ask a question. So I can pull up this prompt right here and I can say, for instance, what are some ideas for creating a utils package in Go, which is language for manipulating strings? And now it opens up this side window and I can see the LLM response being streamed into me here. I can navigate this like I'm used to in NeoVim and go through and read it. So I can see things like, you should probably do safe Unicode slicing and other developer-esque sort of things. Truncation display, slugify, camel to snake. So camel to snake's interesting here, right? So now we move into a different way that I want to use this. If I move over here, let's create a function and I'm going to call it camel to snake. Then I can highlight this entire thing and I can pull up a way to edit and I can say, this function should convert camel to snake in Go. And I'll hit enter on that. And down below, you can see it's saying generating edit. And we should see that the code then gets replaced in place with a function that does what I was asking for. The reason I like this is because my analogy earlier of keep your hands on the wheel as you're, using the autopilot, like I can have an ongoing conversation, generating ideas, thinking about how I want to approach something. And then I can be working in the code itself and starting to do things like I'll write out a function, but I don't want to really fill this in. This is sort of bog standard stuff rather than look it up or like write it all myself. I can just easily bring up this box, have a prompt to say, this function is supposed to do this, fire it off, let it go. As I go about working on some new stuff here, use it as an assistant as I go to accelerate, what I'm working on.
So that's a bit like GitHub Copilot, but in an interface that you prefer.
It's funny you mentioned that because one of the other functions that I have here, if I bring up these functions on here, you can see there's FIM, that's called fill in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so I have a local model running that if I were to maybe, I'll switch over into more of a JavaScript thing here. And I say function fib and then open parentheses. And most developers are going to recognize this is probably saying I want to write a function that solves like Fibonacci, like to get numbers in the Fibonacci pattern. And then I hit a shortcut here to do fill in the middle. And now I have an auto-hinted version of solving this that I could accept with tab, or I could erase. It's Copilot-esque. It's a little rough around the edges right now, but I could hit tab and accept this. I don't know why it gave me like 3 versions of it. But the last thing is, let's say I am going into a code base that is new. So this is actually my prompt D code base, like the code that I was showing you on GitHub. I have it here locally, but let's say I don't know how any of this thing works. I also have prompt D task, which is your agentic flow, your back and forth. So I can open that up and prompt it and say, what does this code base even do? And now on the side, it opens up the back and forth where it's thinking and asking for different commands and reading things and like reading the README, reading like different explanations. And then it's given me its output here. You can see it says, in short, it's a headless protocol-based AI coding engine that any editor can integrate with over a local socket. I can also use this to not just explain stuff to me. I can use this to write code similar to how Eric was doing. I could plug it into any model. I could theoretically connect this to Fable and say, go do things in NeoVim like the same way that Eric was doing with his example there. So it gives me more control over how I use it. I get to keep more of my data. I get to be more portable with it, but I also get more flexibility and tool sets, whether I want to be totally hands-off or I want to be very hands-on or anything in between.
Cool. That's great. I mean, what's interesting is that you brought the AI into your tool of choice. And that is like, so there's a control aspect to there. Okay, so we're coming to the last part. Rapid fire questions. So really short, but try and be as convincing as you can. Sundar said just last year that 30% of all new code at Google is AI generated. Does that mean that anybody can become, to some extent, a Google coder now?
Are we buzzing in for who gets to talk first?
You go first, Ian.
All right. First, I'll say that whenever you see quotes from CEOs that say things of that nature, we don't know what that means. Is that like autocomplete? Is that fully hands-off vibe? But does that mean that anybody can write Google code? No. I think what we've demoed here in many ways is, even if you want to be hands-off and use these tools in a hands-off way, knowing what to look for and what to ask is extremely important. How code should be built, what you should look out for, what is important to do or not to do, is only going to make you more effective at using these tools, and these tools become definitely less effective and even sometimes more dangerous if you don't know what it's building, why it's building it, or how to understand it.
Yeah. Anybody can write software. Not everybody can write good software.
Fair. Okay, so I was also interested to see this between 2024 and 2034, and they're standing by these numbers. The US labor stats are projecting that there will be a 15% increase in what they call software developer. And so hearing you talk and how a software developer now increasingly is using the tools, they don't trust it, but they use it in almost unanimously. What is even a software developer now?
What was a software developer before? I mean, this. I'm sorry, Eric. I guess I buzzed in faster than you again. But these debates are not, like, as much as people want to think that they're new. They're actually not. I was listening to people debating about the difference between an engineer, a developer, an architect, and a scientist when it comes to computer/software, long before these problems cropped up. And also, when it comes to these tool sets that make things for you, but should you trust them or not trust them, codeless tool sets and capabilities have popped up
in the developer community. But if you are an entrepreneur and you're building a business which will include proprietary IP and software, and you're building a team, what is the role now of a software developer? Because it used to be, if you wanted to start the next eBay, the software developer would be able to kind of architect the solution, but also build the code, write the code, commit the code to the server, test it, and be responsible for debugging it. As more and more of these things are either heavily aided or replaced, what is in your mind, a software developer now? Is that just gone and it's just, we're at a new role?
I think the knowledge, like if I'm looking for someone to build something now, the core knowledge is still important, right? You have to know what you are doing and how you would want to architect it. What are the constraints? You have to like have the understanding, the knowledge, the language to define those constraints.
Yeah.
And then the tools might be different. I will say that a lot of us, no matter what you do, oftentimes you do things outside of what is your core job. And I think that like so many times when I talk to engineers, it's like, well, I'm kind of also doing some project management, or like I'm helping to define the features and like the test plan here, right? Mm-hmm. I think what AI is letting people do is sort of expand, like it's collapsing roles a little bit so that you have people who are able to work a little bit more broadly. In some cases, that can be a really beneficial thing. If you're a small team trying to move quickly, like having one person who really understands a few key components of what's being built and using AI to help them actually stretch across those components, like it makes a big difference in the way that a build can go.
I think abstraction and how that changes over generations of technology development, like it is meant that I or others come in understanding a certain level of abstracted technology, but that language is built upon the foundations of something else, which is then built upon the foundations of something else and something else and something else. If you go back decade by decade, you're going back in time across engineers that had to know how to do something lower level because the higher level didn't exist. That being said, even if you can use the higher level most of the time, the really good engineers, are the ones that go beyond just what is the high level abstraction that is needed most of the time, because they are saying, I'm not going to stop at just this level of abstraction. I'm going to keep going. And so if one of the abstractions that we're adopting right now, and by the way, I mean, sentiment really varies widely. As many developers as there are like really embracing a lot of vibe coding, I'm also seeing a lot of those developers who did try for a while say, I'm losing my taste for it and want to get more hands-on again. So where we land, we'll see. But it is a level of abstraction. It is an opportunity and an offering, and it's not going to go away in terms of this is a way that you could approach developing code. But should you only limit yourself to that? I would personally argue, absolutely not. You should understand what it's making. Even if these answers or these easy buttons to just do the work for you exist, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still understand the underpinnings of it. You need to know what it's like to make these things before you then decide which ones can just be auto-generated for you with the big easy button.
Yeah, I think that summarizes quite well, because there's this giant, in the Indiana Jones scene when he's running and he's got this big ball chasing him. I've always felt like great developers, when they step into a project, the big ball is like the technical debt that they're inheriting and that they have to unpick. And something that I think AI might be bringing to the table is, if everybody's a developer, that means everybody can contribute to technical debt. Everybody can create a YouTube player, but potentially add system failure points and just generate all these issues. So maybe if there is a next generation of developer, it's actually someone who isn't going to be doing the work more, but is maybe more accountable for something maybe that's going to become increasingly more complex. So I don't know if you're a business and you're looking to recruit a developer or work with a developing shop, maybe the task is actually more difficult now than it's ever been, because it used to be, can you do it? Yeah. If you can, you qualify to some extent. But if everybody can do a player because they've spent some time prompting it and read a few posts on Reddit, the risk is that you did a higher caliber of developer now. Yeah. Is that fair?
All these companies love posting like graphs showing like, look, each one of our folks are now generating 8 times more code than they did previously. But all the best engineers that I know look at that and that is not an ingratiating standpoint to their point of view. It makes them terrified. Every line of code you put into a code base is a spot that's possible for vulnerability. I don't know what your assessment is. This is a biased anecdotal assessment, but I would not say that I am seeing the quality of the things that I use every day for years. I'm not seeing it increasing at the moment. I feel like I'm running across things being less performant and more buggy. And so I cannot help but speculate as to whether those are correlated.
Okay. I think gone around the subject pretty well. Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting episode. Thank you. I think that it's going to be an ongoing subject, development.
Yeah.
It was good to step away from the headlines and talk to people who actually work with it. So I appreciate you both for spending the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure.
It's been fun.
Thank you.
Chat soon. Bye.